She was humiliated in a luxury car showroom until karma struck back instantly. The scent of polished leather and fresh coffee filled the air inside the luxury car showroom. Monique took a deep breath as she adjusted her blazer, standing behind the sleek glass counter. She had worked here for 3 years, long enough to know that no matter how well she did her job, some people would never respect her. She saw it in the way customers looked right past her, assuming she was just an assistant. She felt it in the way her manager, Mr. Collins, treated her like she was invisible, unless, of course, he needed someone to take the blame for a mistake. But Monique never let it get to her. She loved cars, and she loved the thrill of making a sale, of seeing a customer light up when they found the perfect ride. She worked harder than anyone else, stayed later, learned everything there was to know about the vehicles in the showroom. And yet, she was always overlooked. That afternoon, a man walked in, dressed in a plain t-shirt and a pair of well-worn jeans. He had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that didn't need flashy clothes to make a statement. Monique smiled and approached him. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" The man glanced around the showroom, his eyes settling on one of the most expensive models, a sleek, black luxury sedan with handcrafted interiors and a price tag that made most people gulp. "I was wondering if I could take a look at that one," he said, nodding toward the car. Monique nodded, already excited. "Of course. That's one of our top models. Let me show you some of the features." But before she could take a step, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Monique, what are you doing?" Mr. Collins strode toward them, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His face was tight with annoyance as he eyed the customer up and down. "Sir, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," he said, smoothly stepping between them. "This particular vehicle is reserved for serious buyers. If you're looking for something in a lower price range, we have some great options outside." Monique felt her stomach drop. She had seen this happen before. She had watched Collins treat other black customers the same way, subtly guiding them toward cheaper models, making assumptions before they even had a chance to speak. But this time, it was different. Because the man didn't react with anger. He just smiled. And that smile sent a ripple of unease through the entire showroom. Something was about to happen. Something no one expected. Monique stood frozen, her heart hammering as she watched the scene unfold. The tension in the showroom was thick, the air suddenly heavier than before. The man, still smiling, took a slow step forward. He didn't look insulted. He didn't look angry. He simply studied Mr. Collins with a gaze that held something unreadable, something that made the manager shift uncomfortably. "I see," the man said finally, his voice even. "And what makes you think I can't afford this car?" Mr. Collins let out a forced chuckle, the kind meant to disguise his discomfort. "Oh, no offense, sir. It's just that we like to focus our time on customers who are more likely to make a purchase." Monique clenched her jaw. She had heard this same excuse before. Different words, same meaning. More likely to make a purchase. That was Mr. Collins' way of saying, "You don't look rich enough." The man let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "That's interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." Then he turned back to Monique. "What were you saying about this car?" She hesitated, glancing between him and her manager. Her instincts told her to back away, to let it go, but another part of her, the part that had spent years swallowing mistreatment, suddenly refused to stay quiet. She lifted her chin. "I was just about to show you its interior. It's one of our finest models, handcrafted leather, state-of-the-art technology. It's an incredibly smooth drive." The man nodded. "Sounds impressive." But before Monique could say another word, Mr. Collins stepped in front of her, effectively cutting her off. "Look, sir," Collins said with a sigh, as if this conversation was exhausting him. "I just don't want to waste your time. Or ours. We have plenty of more affordable options, something more in your range. Maybe a pre-owned model?" Monique's stomach churned. She knew what was coming next. She had seen it happen before. Customers, humiliated and frustrated, would either storm out or shrink back, apologizing as if they had done something wrong just by stepping foot in the showroom. But this man, he didn't do either. Instead, he turned fully toward Mr. Collins, his smile widening, though this time there was something sharper in it. "You know," he said, "it's funny. I've been to a lot of showrooms in my life. But I don't think I've ever been told, right to my face, that I couldn't afford something." Mr. Collins' face turned a shade paler. "That's not what I..." "Because that's what you meant, isn't it?" Silence. The kind of silence that made even the other employees stop pretending to be busy and suddenly turn their heads. Monique could feel her pulse racing. Then, as if on cue, the showroom doors swung open and two sharply dressed men in suits walked in. They scanned the room, eyes locking onto the man in the t-shirt and jeans. "There you are, sir," one of them said. "We've been waiting for you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Collins stiffened. Monique's breath caught in her throat. And the man, still smiling, turned back to the manager with the ease of someone who had been expecting this moment all along. "Oh," he said. "I guess I forgot to introduce myself." He extended his hand. "My name is Elijah Carter." He let the words hang for a beat before finishing, "I own this showroom." And just like that, the entire world seemed to stop turning. A sharp, stunned silence settled over the showroom. Mr. Collins' mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His eyes darted from the suited men to Elijah, then back to Monique, as if hoping someone would jump in and tell him this was all a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. Elijah Carter. A name Monique recognized immediately. A name she had seen in auto industry magazines and articles about successful entrepreneurs who had defied expectations. She had even heard coworkers mention him in passing, though they had always assumed he was just another wealthy investor, someone who rarely showed up at his own businesses. And yet, here he was. Dressed like any other customer, watching, waiting. The weight of the moment hit Monique like a wave. She had been on the receiving end of Mr. Collins' quiet discrimination for years. She had watched it happen to others, helpless to stop it. But now, justice had walked in through the front door. "Why you? You own this showroom?" Mr. Collins finally sputtered. Elijah tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth curling. "I own all of them," he said simply. "This one, the one downtown, the one in Chicago. Every single showroom with my name on it." Monique caught the slight shift in Mr. Collins' posture. His usual arrogance, the one he wore like a badge of honor, was cracking, piece by piece. I didn't realize." "No, you didn't." Elijah's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable steeliness to it. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Mr. Collins swallowed hard. "Sir, I meant no disrespect. I was just..." Elijah held up a hand. "You assumed," he said coolly. "You assumed that because I walked in dressed like this, I wasn't worth your time. You assumed that Monique, one of your hardest working employees, was beneath you. You assumed, and in doing so, you insulted both of us." Monique felt her heart pounding. She had dreamed of a moment like this. Dreamed of seeing Mr. Collins put in his place, forced to face the consequences of his actions. But even now, even as the moment unfolded before her, she could see the gears turning in Collins' head, scrambling for a way out. I didn't mean any harm, sir," Mr. Collins stammered. "It was a misunderstanding. If I had known who you were..." Elijah's expression darkened. "That's the problem," he cut in. His voice wasn't raised, but it was sharp enough to slice through the air like a knife. "You would have treated me differently if you had known who I was. But how many customers have walked in here and faced the same treatment? How many times have you made someone feel like they weren't good enough just because of how they looked?" Collins' face was beet red now. Elijah turned to Monique. "And you?" His tone softened slightly. Has this happened before? Monique hesitated, her pulse quickening. She could feel Colin's stare burning into her, silently daring her to speak up. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. She met Elijah's gaze and said, clearly, yes. A hush fell over the room. Collins let out a nervous laugh, as if trying to brush it off. Monique, come on, now. Let's not. Every time a black customer comes in, she continued, voice steady, you steer them toward the lower-end models. You assume they can't afford anything else. You let the other salespeople cut in and take their commission. And when I try to help them, you make sure I don't get credit for the sale. Elijah's jaw tightened. And that's just the customers, Monique added. I've been here 3 years. 3. I've sold more cars than half the team, and yet I've never been promoted. Never been acknowledged. While guys with half my experience get raises and bonuses. Colin's voice turned desperate. Monique, let's not be dramatic. I'm not. She turned fully to face him. I'm being honest. Something you should have tried a long time ago. Elijah nodded slowly, his gaze unreadable. Then, without turning to Collins, he spoke again. You're fired. Collins' entire body jerked back, as if the words had physically struck him. Wait, sir, please. I've worked here for too long, Elijah said smoothly. And I think it's about time we clean house. Collins looked around, eyes darting to the other employees, searching for support. But no one moved. No one spoke. He turned back to Elijah. Please, I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you did, Elijah cut in. Now pack your things. Collins stumbled back a step, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed off toward his office. The silence he left behind was deafening. Elijah let out a slow breath before turning to Monique. How long have you been here? 3 years, she said. He nodded. And in 3 years, no promotion? No. Not anymore. Monique blinked. What? Elijah smiled. You're the new showroom manager. Her breath hitched. What? You've been doing the work already, he said simply. Now you'll get paid for it. For the first time in a long time, Monique felt something unfamiliar. Something warm, something strong. Recognition. Respect. Thank you, she whispered, barely trusting her voice. Elijah grinned. No, Monique. Thank you. And just like that, everything changed. Monique still couldn't believe it. She stood in the middle of the showroom, her heart hammering in her chest as the weight of Elijah's words sank in. You're the new showroom manager. For years, she had given everything to this job, pushing through the exhaustion, swallowing every slight, every unfair decision. And now, in the span of just a few minutes, everything had changed. Around her, the other employees were still in shock. Some whispered among themselves, stealing glances at her. A few of them, particularly the ones who had always dismissed her, suddenly looked nervous. As for Mr. Collins? Well, he wasn't handling things as gracefully. From the corner of her eye, Monique saw him stumbling out of his office, a cardboard box in his hands, his face flushed with humiliation. The confident, condescending man who had strutted around the showroom just an hour ago was gone. In his place was a desperate, defeated man who couldn't believe this was happening to him. I don't deserve this, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he walked toward the door. After everything I've done for this company. Elijah turned, his gaze cool. Everything you've done? Collins stopped, swallowing hard. You mean like pushing your best employee aside? Elijah continued. Or treating customers differently based on your own assumptions? Or taking credit for sales that weren't yours? Monique's breath hitched. She had suspected Collins had been stealing commissions, but hearing Elijah say it out loud, confirming it, was something else entirely. Colin's face twisted into something ugly. This is ridiculous. I built this showroom up. I brought in more sales than anyone else. Elijah raised a brow. Did you? The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Collins realized no one was defending him. No one was coming to his rescue. All the employees who had once followed his lead, who had laughed at his cruel remarks and turned a blind eye to his favoritism, were now avoiding his gaze. Because the truth was out. And no one wanted to go down with him. With a choked scoff, Collins turned his glare to Monique. "Oh, don't look so proud of yourself," he sneered. "You think this changes anything? You think you're suddenly important because this guy handed you a title?" Monique held his gaze, unshaken. "No," she said calmly. "I think I was always important. You just never wanted to see it." Collins' lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to insult her one last time, but Elijah beat him to it. "You can go now," Elijah said, his voice cool and final. Collins' eyes darted between them. He had no more moves left, no more power to cling to. So, with a bitter huff, he turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit. As the showroom doors swung shut behind him, the tension in the room seemed to break. A few employees let out low whistles. One even muttered, "Damn," under their breath. Elijah, on the other hand, barely seemed fazed. He turned back to Monique, offering her a knowing smile. "You okay?" She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. Then, she nodded. "Yeah. I think I am." "Good." He clapped his hands together, looking around. "Because we've got some changes to make around here." Monique's stomach flipped, not with nerves, but with excitement. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Monique could feel the shift in the air. For the first time in years, she wasn't just another employee, invisible to those in charge. She wasn't being talked over, dismissed, or pushed aside. She had a voice, and more importantly, she was being heard. Elijah turned to her, his expression warm but serious. "Come with me," he said. She followed him toward the manager's office, the same office where she had stood countless times, listening to Collins take credit for her work, making excuses for why she hadn't been promoted. But now, as she stepped inside, she wasn't standing in front of the desk. She was standing behind it. Elijah leaned against the doorframe. "I wasn't joking about the promotion," he said. "You've been running this place without the title for long enough. It's time to make it official." Monique's breath caught. But I don't have management experience." Elijah chuckled. "Neither did I when I started my first business. You learn as you go. And besides," he gestured to the showroom floor, "you already know this place better than anyone. You know the customers, the sales, the inventory. You've been doing the job without the paycheck. Now, you'll get both." Monique hesitated. A part of her still couldn't believe this was happening. After everything she had been through, was she really about to step into the role she had always dreamed of? But then she remembered. The long hours. The customers she had helped, only for someone else to steal the sale. The whispered conversations behind her back. The countless times she had been overlooked. No more. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and nodded. "I won't let you down." Elijah smiled. "I know you won't." Outside the office, the other employees were watching with barely concealed curiosity. Some looked pleased. Others, nervous. Change was coming, and they all knew it. Elijah turned to address them. "Monique is your new manager," he said. "That means things are going to be different around here. We're done with favoritism. We're done with discrimination. From now on, this showroom is a place where the best people rise, no matter what they look like." A few employees exchanged glances, and Monique knew exactly which ones were worried. The ones who had thrived under Collins' leadership. But she didn't care. For once, things were being done right. Elijah clapped a hand on her shoulder. "I'll be checking in, but this is your place now, Monique." She met his gaze and saw something in his eyes: trust. Not because she was lucky. Not because she had been handed something she hadn't earned. But because she deserved it. As Elijah left, Monique turned back to her team. Some of them smiled at her. Others looked away. She took a deep breath. "All right," she said, her voice steady, strong. "Let's get to work." And just like that, Monique stepped into the future she had always been meant for. As Monique walked across the showroom floor, she could still feel the lingering stares of her colleagues. Some were watching with admiration, others with uncertainty, and a few with resentment. She understood. Change wasn't easy, especially for those who had benefited from the way things used to be. But Monique wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. She was here to make things right. She glanced toward the glass entrance doors, where the reflection of her own face stared back at her. The woman looking back wasn't the same woman who had walked into work that morning. That woman had been patient. She had been tolerant. But this woman? She was done waiting for what she deserved. For the first time, Monique felt the weight of her new role settle in, not as a burden, but as something she was ready to carry. She had been fighting battles in silence for too long. Now, she had the power to make sure no one else would have to. As she reached the sales desk, she looked around at her team, and spoke. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, her voice steady. "And things will be different from now on. If you're ready to build something better, then let's get started." Some nodded, eager to see what changes would come. Others hesitated. But it didn't matter. Because Monique wasn't waiting for approval anymore. She was in charge now. And for the first time in her life, the road ahead wasn't blocked. It was wide open. What do you think? Do you believe Monique handled the situation the right way? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice being served, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. Because sometimes, karma doesn't wait. It walks right through the front door. Life has a way of teaching us that patience and perseverance are not signs of weakness, but rather the foundation of true strength. Monique's story reminds us that dignity cannot be taken away, it can only be surrendered. For years, she endured mistreatment, believing that hard work would eventually be recognized. And while the world often seems unfair, justice has a way of arriving when we least expect it. This story is a powerful reminder that character outweighs status, and true worth is not measured by outward appearances, but by integrity and resilience. In a society where people are too often judged by superficial markers of success, Monique's journey teaches us that real power comes from standing firm in who we are, even when others fail to see our value. For those of us who have lived long enough to witness the ebb and flow of life's challenges, this truth is even more profound. Respect is not always given freely, but it can always be earned. And when the time is right, the world will have no choice but to acknowledge it. Never underestimate the quiet strength of perseverance. Sometimes, it's the very thing that changes everything.